Welcome to Paranormal M, where each episode explores the boundaries of the unknown. Subscribe and activate notifications to never miss out on our latest chilling episodes. Dive into the supernatural with us. A weird experience I had in my old apartment. So I had a weird experience in my old apartment I used to live in. I was watching YouTube videos about other people's paranormal experiences. Thought I would share mine. So in October of 2022, I was 25. I just moved into my first apartment. It was very old and it was built in 1940. It's almost 100 years old. It was originally built to house railroad workers. The name of the apartment was the Paramount Apartment in Pocatello, Idaho. The whole apartment complex was a bunch of studios and a few one-bedrooms. I lived in a studio apartment with my Dalmatian, so it was just the two of us. There would be weird things that happened every now and then that I just would ignore. It's because I didn't want to think about it, really. Things like falling over in the kitchen that were in the living room or the bedroom, or weird noises. Nothing major. And like I said, I just didn't want to think about it. However, one time I had an experience where I just couldn't ignore it. So in my studio apartment, the kitchen is on its own room. Then the main room was my living room and the bedroom. I always kept my weed in my junk drawer in my kitchen hidden, but I knew where it was. One day I left for the day and I hadn't smoked, for a couple of days at least, so it was in the junk drawer and that's where I always kept it. However, when I came back home, my Ziploc baggie that had my weed in it was sitting in the middle of my living room. It was almost perfectly in the middle. My apartment was locked when I left and nobody else had access to it. I was unnerved by this and I didn't even touch it right away. Finally, I picked it up and put it back in the junk drawer. Nothing was missing out of it, but I just couldn't come up with any logical explanation for why it would have gotten from the junk drawer in my kitchen to almost the exact center of my living room and bedroom. I know it's not a super scary ghost story, but it was a weird paranormal encounter I just thought I would share. The old missing weed. When the veil lifted. I believed in ghosts when I was little. I had a handful of experiences when I was little and a negative attachment by the time I was in middle school. At that point, my mom got a job in a different town. I stayed with my aunt to continue attending school in my hometown. I never felt comfortable sleeping there, like something was watching me with deep hatred. I'd have nightmares of things pulling me out of the window. Grays, shadows, Santa Claus. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to see a tall, dark figure standing in my doorway, moved my mattress from the wall and would sleep in a sort of crevice to hide. In that house, sculptures I made for my aunt would break. A drama mask made out of clay flew off the wall and split into two. Eventually, bruises formed on my arms, like a big hand was squeezing me tight. That was when my mom noticed she'd called her friend. We visited her aunt in El Paso a couple of times. I don't remember much of what happened. I just remembered the last time being rubbed with an egg in a cemetery. Yeah, I'd remember that too. That's when the lady finished. She chucked the egg as hard as she could and told my mom just to leave immediately. After that, the weirdness stopped, but I grew up without really thinking about it. Over time, I became more agnostic. I would refer to science and physical evidence. And at some point, I entered a destructive hedonistic cycle, would drive myself into a deeper depression. The same could be said for my roommates. We all sort of just numbed ourselves in the same ways. We didn't really mind wasting away together, but God forbid anybody try to get better. Come October 2022, one night I was wearing thin, and, my mother saw that she gave me a St. Michael amulet that she got from the Vatican. On the drive home, my girlfriend and I got into a pretty big fight on the phone. I was a couple of blocks away from my house when a black ran in my path. The instant the beam from my headlight hit the cat, vanished. I relayed what I saw to my girlfriend on the phone and asked if I was being lucid. She confirmed I was. When I got to my house, we still had some things to say to each other that I just didn't want to bring into a house full of people. So I parked and stayed on the phone. Throughout the conversation, I noticed a shadowy figure wearing a hat standing in my neighbor's yard across the street. They'd disappear if I looked at them directly, but I could see them clear as day in my periphery. And I should say that during this period I didn't have any interest in modern supernatural phenomena, and had no prior knowledge of certain memes. My initial thought was maybe I was hallucinating the creep in the neighborhood watch signs. I relayed everything to my girlfriend in real time. Their posture was defensive and intimidating, but not toward me. They weren't concerned by me at all, but they were looking just past me on my side of the street. I looked towards my driveway where my roommate's car's parked and see a tall, slender being. It was almost translucent. It glowed a soft white. It had no face, but I could tell it was watching me. The second we locked faces, it crouched behind the car. Its body was too big and I could see parts of its limbs popping out of the car's silhouette. I felt the shadow figure's posture tense. I felt tense. Got the feeling that the hat man was protecting my neighbor's house. He had a fuck around and find out sort of a feeling to him. I think our awareness had the white thing pinned, and after 5 minutes I felt safe enough to go inside even though I could still see it. It was kind of instinctual, made my aura bigger and blasted "don't fuck with me" energy as I walked to my front door. I went straight to my room and my girlfriend sent me driveway footage from Kentucky. The second I saw the video I froze and goosebumps ran up my body. It was the same entity that was in my driveway. I could still see it. I want to reiterate that I haven't been living a spiritual life. I don't judge and I don't push my beliefs on anyone. Live and let live. I lit some incense that my mom had given me to help calm me down enough to sleep. The next day I told my mom what happened. She didn't seem surprised. She already had like a kit put together for me. I was getting ready to pick it up. My roommate came out of the room with a noticeably hateful vibe. They were best friends and everything just flipped overnight. My sister helped me bring the kit back from the house and clean my room for smudging. She was hanging out in the living room with my roommate and left for work, and she caught the same energy that I did earlier. I left the door to his room open and she saw a tall, skinny, pale creature standing in the doorway. Heard my roommate's door slam as I went downstairs. My sister grabbed her things from the couch and said I had a lot of work to do. I had to smudge the house 3 times, once with sage, Palo Santo, and copal. With each smudging, the smoke turned darker and darker. I found myself getting confused and arguing with myself, but I can't remember why or what for. By the time I got to my room and the smoke was black, it continued till I got to my closet. Then the smoke bellowed uncontrollably. Felt like I was the one who was choking and being chased out with smoke. I said, "You can have this place, but you can't have me. If you try to fuck with me again, I'll pull your ass out of here myself." A white ring of smoke rose from my copal in the ceiling and it grew and fell over me. The air felt clear. The house was quiet. I moved out shortly after and I'm trying to take better care of myself now. I do see ghosts more often now. And it very well might have been you also being choked out by smoke. Can't breathe that in too well. Time glitch or sleep delirium? I work from home. I start work at 7 a.m. every morning from my computer taking phone calls. My alarm went off this morning at 6:45. I snoozed it like I always do and then get up when the second one went off. I had this extremely strong, creepy feeling that I've never had before in my own home. Like something just wasn't right. I just don't know what. It was strong though. I got dressed, left the bedroom to go to my computer. Turned on every light in my apartment and closed the door behind my back in a little office room that I never close. I just felt creeped out having an open door behind me this morning. And I never felt like this in my own home. So I sat for 17 minutes without a call coming in. Usually my phone rings within 30 seconds of turning it on in the morning. So it was like 7:17 at this point, but then suddenly I look at the clock again and it's fucking 2:17 a.m. Got goosebumps. I had an extreme shiver down my spine. I was just so shocked because my alarms went off twice. I always watch the clock in the morning because I have to turn my phone on at 7 o'clock, the exact minute. So I just sat there for another 10 minutes, what the hell? Look at the clock again and it's 2:22. I scrolled through my alarm apps on my phone a dozen times expecting to see a 1:45 a.m. alarm that accidentally set or something, but there wasn't. I'm just assuming that I dreamt my alarm and woke up too groggy to really notice what hour it was, but it sure didn't feel like that in that moment. The couch flipped over. In the early 2000s, my mom was working at an all-girls group home as an assistant supervisor. The house she worked in had a creepy atmosphere. Unexplained smells, sounds, and silhouettes. The female residents approached her, and her work partner had to do some form of a seance since they were into that kind of thing. It was a Friday night, so the residents were bored, wanted something fun to do. The supervisor herself was the supervisor herself was indigenous, so she seemed on board with the idea, even if only to entertain the girls so they'd stop misbehaving for the night. Everybody went to the basement. Everybody was accounted for, meaning nobody was upstairs or missing whatsoever. The head supervisor sat on a couch long enough for 3 people or so, but sat alone. The resident sat on the floor in front of her. My mom sat in a chair off to the side. They turned the lights off. There was a laundry room connected to the basement room that was lit up, and the door was still left ajar, which is important for later. The head supervisor led the group by asking questions out loud. As she started to ask questions out loud to the room, she had asked for something or someone to prove that they were present by making sounds or producing smells. My mom then smelled something, not rotten or gross, but more so sweet. It was really quiet, so she continued asking more questions. She had asked something similar to the question of, "Are you responsible for the heavy and negative aura of this home?" She continued on. All of a sudden it happened. The couch the supervisor was on, it flipped over. The supervisor went flying into the air in front of the residents. Nobody could have pushed the couch at all. The girls were sitting in front of the couch, and because the small light from the door left ajar, they were able to see how everybody was still sitting in the front. It wasn't possible for the supervisor to have flipped the couch alone. She was a very tiny and petite woman. The couch was a very large, heavy couch, basically making it impossible for her to have tried to prank them. She also seemed incredibly freaked out and afterwards ran upstairs with everybody else. It was clear that there was some form of activity or weirdness or bad feeling in the home. After that night, even years later, weird occurrences kept happening and the negative aura never went away. Every time my mom would enter the basement to do laundry or other tasks, she'd feel as though she was being watched. I myself was actually able to go to that house once, and the vibe was not good from what I remember, even though at the time I wasn't really aware of the story yet. Toddler son saw little girl in empty room. What now? My parents have been renovating an old house that's primarily only been used as a seasonal home. It sits near scenic lake in upstate New York. It's near the Canadian border. They live out of state, so we go up there when they're up for a visit or to occasionally help out, maybe chill in the lake in the summer. On a recent visit by my parents, I was about to leave to go home with my 3-year-old son. He pointed into an empty dark room and casually asked, "What's that little girl doing in there just talking?" My son didn't seem at all scared, just curious, almost smiling, like he wanted to go play with her. I told him, "I don't know, don't worry about it. Let me put your shoes on." He quickly switched focus to getting ready so we could go. My parents were there too and witnessed the whole thing, but completely acted like it was nothing as they're very much skeptics. In the following days, however, my dad's mentioned that he's noticed for a long time how his tools and supplies for renovation sometimes seem to have been moved, and he's felt a certain presence. I've always felt a little bit of a spiritual presence in this house, but figured it was to be expected. It's one of the oldest houses in the area. The area itself is also very old, with many historical events having taken place nearby. For example, just 500 feet away is an old small cemetery. The feeling in the house always seems strongest just after nightfall, and it's not a scary or malevolent thing, it's more of a feeling that you're not alone. Not to come around the corner or door to find somebody right there, or maybe you're being watched. Other visitors have told me that they get the same vibe, but we just chalked it up to old house energy. Now, maybe we have a better idea of who is there. Give my son credit because he isn't one to make up something like that. He's at an age where if he's using his imagination, he's very obviously dramatic and hilarious. He's also said similar things before in relation to my husband's family old farmhouse. Made sense that he was talking to or spending time with deceased relatives in a loving manner, like only 2 times. It may be noteworthy that on a recent walk by the small cemetery near the lake house, I was drawn to the grave of a girl who died at the age of 5. The day she died was the same week that my son had this experience of seeing the little girl. I have no way to know if she ever lived in that house, but it seems fairly possible given the small amount of houses in the area at the time and being only a few gravestones in the cemetery. My hope is that we can all live in peace. Although this spirit seems to be innocent, we'd rather it stayed chill and not freak anyone out. Any advice would be welcome. A spiritual friend recommended maybe burning sage or placing black tourmaline crystals. But I don't want to upset the spirit. Some sort of soothing energy would seem best. But I'm open to input. Another weird experience in my home. So it's been a little while since I posted any strange things happening. Life got a bit hectic for a while, so if anything odd happened, I unfortunately haven't noticed. All the weird things have been kinda silly, nothing scary or anything. Also, I'm not fully convinced that my experiences are paranormal, but I haven't figured out what's going on yet. Tried posting in a glitch in the Matrix sub, but they didn't allow it. Please let me know if I'm in the wrong sub again. So a few days ago, my husband and I took the kids for a walk to the park. When we got home, after everybody was inside the house, I went to close the door. Now, my door is a bit wonky right now. Definitely needs some new hardware. But I just haven't gotten to it yet. Must be locked or it won't stay closed all the way, especially on windy days. I also have to push it a bit to get the locked parts to sort of line up. But as I was pushing the door, I felt like something was blocking it from closing all the way. So I opened it to check what was in the way. I didn't see anything though, so I pushed it closed again. This time it closed properly, so I reached down to lock it. Just as I was about to turn the lock, it felt like somebody was trying to push the door back open from the outside. So I looked through the little peephole and saw no one out there. Opened the door to get a better look, thinking my husband must be trying to pull a funny on me. No one was out there. I confirmed that we were all inside. So I closed the door again, and this time it locked easily. My experience with the poltergeist, 2014. I was lying awake in my bedroom. It's 2:30 in the morning. Didn't sleep much due to frequent bouts of sleep paralysis. All of a sudden, my cat Luna woke up out of a dead sleep, looked around, and sprinted out of the room. I said out loud, "That's not good." Just as soon as the words had exited my mouth, my box fan got thrown against the wall and smashed. My alarm clock got thrown at me. Running out of my room, I went right down the hallway to get to my brother. I found him pale as a ghost standing outside of his door. He later told me that he saw himself laying in his bed and floating upwards. This large, dark cloud surrounded him. He couldn't breathe, and his cat jumped onto his chest and scratched the shit out of him, just to wake him up. We both agreed that we had to go get my father and wake him up. Now, the house was from 1847. It was a 2-story duplex, and my parents were sleeping in the apartment, so to get there, we had to go down the stairs through the kitchen outside and to another flight of stairs to wake them up. As soon as I came down the stairs, I could hear slamming cabinets as I walked into the kitchen. I was greeted with the sight of all of the doors opening and closing at the same time. I always thought that these things don't have any power over you that you don't give them, so I exclaimed, "You are not welcome here. You need to leave." And as soon as I said that, all the spices in the cabinet were thrown at me. So we ran upstairs, woke up my father, and when he came down, he started burning frankincense and myrrh. Then he grabbed his guitar and played a song in Latin. Everything started to calm down after that. My father made a concoction out of sherry cream and nutmeg, placed it out in front of the porch, and left the light on for the rest of the night. I've had a lot of other happenings in that house, but that was by far the worst, and the only one that directly meant physical harm to us. My only explanation as to what caused it is my mother had left 2 mercury mirrors facing each other while trying to communicate with the other side. Let them open overnight. That's my story. Feel free to ask me any questions. White woman walked across the yard. Not deer. So not one to make posts often, but I have 2 experiences that seem to stand out. I've had a lot of items messed with, such as poltergeist stuff, but these 2 I need opinions on. So first one, I was 19 and I'm 26 now. Used to go to my buddies a lot. We'll call him T. Kept some of my things in his spare camper in a locked safe in the property. Sometimes I'd show up to get my quote-unquote things before dark, and while I was scrounging around in the safe, I'd always get this feeling or thought in my head like, get out, or I'll be scared looking over my shoulder hurrying. Anyway, T always would tell me that his items in his yard would move at night. So it was pretty obvious it was haunted. I didn't really fully believe, but one day T sends me the weirdest photo ever. It's an all-black picture, but you can just barely see T's outline. And over it is the most demonic picture I've ever seen. Some white woman demon thing coming to the camera. It sent dress down my spine, and I used to keep this pic, but deleted it as it felt cursed. Dress down your spine, eh? Anyway, one night me and T went to go get my things. We hung out a lot back then, and anyway, he lived down a gravel road and it was real bumpy. So you went slow and were surrounded by trees till you get to the campers all next to the stream and the railroad tracks. Anyway, we were headed down it, and he says all of a sudden, "F-man, you're gonna see something, I'm sorry, I can feel it." I'm thinking like, what? We're both pretty high as we smoked all the time, but as he said that the high left, I felt dread, like my hair stand up. It felt cold, like my eyes started to water. He just kept slowly driving till I got to his driveway. I pulled in, and clear as day was a white woman in a white dress, walking across his yard. She didn't acknowledge us, she just walked slowly and ominously, sucking all the warmth and good energy around her. Needless to say, I yeeted it the fuck out of there. After that, I never really had anybody to talk to about it, so I just figured I'd post it here. After that, I no longer like being out at night. I know when that stuff's around. You just feel it. Second encounter wasn't as exciting, but to this day, I don't know what I saw. Some years later, which is last year, we lived in a town in a small trailer. We lived opposite an empty field, and on the other side was a lot of houses. My wife was getting home from work late and walked home. I was waiting for her and looked out the window to see her coming home. Mind you, I can't remember if she drove or walked home that night. Anyway, we always got scary vibes at night, especially from the field. I told her there was a scraper. That's the cryptid I think about most often, in the dark, scared. But anyways, the field had a streetlight nearby. As I saw my wife come home, there was 2 deer in the field, except I didn't get a good look. She did. It looked to be a giant deer. It was right beside a normal one. Except I didn't see its face and its vibe felt off, the only way I can describe it. I look away because my dogs bark, and I look back and it's gone. She came and I was like, what the fuck was that? We both agreed it's a cryptid, and I look up some stuff and come across the not deer so we assume it was that. Her next day at work at the bar, though, locals said that there was a skinwalker in town. My wife hasn't told that woman what we saw. I think my house is haunted. In 2021, I moved into the house I currently live in, and I'm currently renting it. The house was built in the 1950s, from what I can gather through records. All seemed fine when we first moved in, except for the red room upstairs. There's this triangular attic-type space. It's painted completely red. It gave me terrible feelings of dread when I first walked into it. For months and months, I left it empty. I wouldn't venture into it. My mother, who's Christian but doesn't believe in ghosts, came to visit the house. That was when we moved in. She walked into that room and said, "Oh my goodness, you should consider having our pastor come and see this and pray." She got the dreadful feelings too. Her bedroom's downstairs below the room. At night I would hear walking and creaking up there. I'd lay awake scared. Then it all went downhill. As I got into bed one night, I heard an echo or a young female-type voice whisper my name directly into my left ear. I went cold. Waking up my partner in a panic, he shrugged it off. The next night, I heard the same voice, but coming from the next room saying hi. I tried my best to ignore these things until one of the scariest nights of my life was upstairs. My office is directly beside the red room, the door separating them. I was at my vanity taking off my makeup. That's when the red room door slowly opened. Over the months, it would randomly open quite often, scaring me, but my partner blaming a draft, even though there wasn't one. I ignored the door. I heard loud footsteps downstairs walking through the house. Assuming it was my partner, I finished my skincare, came back down for bed. The whole house was dark. Thought that's weird. I just heard him walking around. But I walked to the bathroom to pee. As I passed the kitchen, I saw a tall, dark shadow figure walk right past me. I could see it through the light coming through the windows. Assumed it was my partner. I even spoke out loud, saying, "Hey, I'll be in bed in a minute." But after the bathroom, I walked to our room, silent. He was asleep. In panic, I shook him awake, saying, "How long have you been asleep? Aren't you walking around earlier and in the kitchen?" Through his sleeping demeanor, he said, "I've been asleep for like 2 hours," and rolled back over. I went completely silent and cold. Turned around to face where the kitchen was and saw nobody. I was terrified. Climbed into the covers and tried to wake him to tell him that we needed to check the house because someone was in here. He didn't listen and just went to sleep and told me to go to sleep. Turned to my face and I saw a tall figure standing directly over him beside the bed in his side. I let out a massive scream, grabbed him. This made him wake up, confused, and asked me what was going on, what was wrong. I cried and I said I saw the person again, over him. He jumped up and checked her whole room under the bed too. He said there really is nobody here. He's a skeptic, always has been. Never was afraid of the house. Well, that changed once he got back into bed. We laid there, and as I finally started feeling less afraid and drift to sleep, a loud bang like a stomp on the ground or dropping a brick. The sound came from the floor in his side of the bed, right where I'd seen the figure. He immediately was shaken from his sleep and screamed, "Okay, what the fuck?" I could tell he was afraid. I'd never seen him afraid. Started to panic, saying, I told you there's something here." I was crying a little bit. I didn't even really know what to do. He immediately checked the entire house. He made sure nobody broken in. Got back in bed and said, "You know that I wasn't a person, right?" He didn't know how to respond. And this is all 100% true. Had happened early last year in 2023. After this event, we moved our bedroom to another room across the house. Turned the old one into a bonus room. And since moving our room, nothing's happened since. Bizarre. I wondered if the entity or something was feeding off of me easily because I was sleeping directly below the red room. Not sure. Since then, the only occurrence that's been the red door opening, the doorknob rattling too. I now rebuke whatever it is when this occurs. I'm not the most religious, but I very loudly and firmly let it know it's not welcome. and it needs to leave me alone. Any thoughts? The Ghost of Maurice Zinderstein. In 2018, during a transitional period of my life, I just sold a home and wanted to rent for a while. Having been a resident of this valley for at least 14 years, I was totally surprised to have located a relatively unknown newly renovated former silk mill. This now elegant award-winning building was behind secured gates. It's in a pocket of wooded Allentown, Pennsylvania. The unit was beautifully designed. It had lofts with high ceilings and rich wood floors and original brick walls. The only unit they had available was 101. I was actually surprised that there was any availability at all, considering its beauty. My unit's door is about 15 feet from the main floor, so sitting in the middle of the lobby, under the protection of a security camera. It was the dead of night during my first week living in apartment 101. A very sound sleeper, so I was jolted awake when I heard 2 firm knocks on my door. I looked at my phone. It was 3 o'clock a.m. Hair stood on the back of my neck. I was immediately afraid. I slowly got up and approached the door. Apprehensively, I looked through the peephole. No one was there. The next day, I emailed the management. I let them know what happened. They offered to check the security cameras during that time. I was hoping it was going to be revealed that it was a neighbor. Maybe it was a neighbor who'd been locked out. I honestly didn't know what explanation there could be for somebody to knock on a new resident's door at 3 a.m. The next day, management replied to my email, saying that no one was at my door all night. This confirmed what I thought, though. My physical response to the knocks told me that I already knew. There was a supernatural presence here. I never knew what people meant when they said felt like being watched. That was until I moved in there. It was constant. Subsequent talks with the other residents revealed that the knocks were quite common among the first few units down from mine, but no one seemed fazed. But a believer in the supernatural, I was compelled to find the story. Arduous internet searches turned up nothing. Allentown has a rich domestic and globally dominant silk, textile, iron mining, and railroad history, so these buildings surely had a role. In the age of the internet, we tend to assume searches will uncover everything, but since history was told and recorded by people, we don't always get the full story. And between the 1800s and 1900s, it wasn't easy to be alive, much less record things. But eventually, pieces of the puzzle began to emerge. The story and name started to take shape. Then critical pieces came in the form of help from Angie at Allentown's Preservation Association. They directed me to David, that's at the city of Allentown. He enabled me to find the fire insurance maps. Sometime after the decline of the railroads, and before the Great Depression, lies the history of this property, with Trout Creek at its base, in the very southeast corner of Allentown. Due to its location and surrounding trees, many people don't even know it's there. The railroad next to it hugging Trout Creek is still very active. You can find retired engineers and train buffs daily, just sitting quietly in their cars with coffee, or out near the tracks and lawn chairs waiting for the trains. A map from 1876 shows Thomas Barber, otherwise known as Iron Man, listed as the property owner of the land. That's the land that Auburn Station sits on, as well as surrounding land framed inside the borders of the waterways. The word quarry is also on this map, which coincides with the previous map's quarry markings. Thomas, his father William Harrison, and his son Joseph were millwrights, iron makers, manufacturers of blast furnaces, mill machinery, gears, boilers, and more. The streets around the Auburn Street station have names such as Barber and Harrison. It appears the Barbers used it only as a quarry for their thriving business, and building that was a few miles away in their thriving downtown. Somewhere between 1876 and 1895, the Barbers sold the land to Maurice Morris Zinderstein. Maurice his wife Anna, and their 2 sons Charles and Emil. They came to Allentown, Pennsylvania in 1895 from New York City. They were German immigrants. They built what was named Palace Mill on these beautiful grounds next to the quarry in 1895. In 1898, Morris's son Emil dies of typhoid fever, salmonella, otherwise known as food poisoning. Research states Maurice took it very hard and became unbalanced. It was written that allegedly Maurice blamed Emil's death on son Charles, and additionally accused their doctor of starving him. Later records showed this wasn't true, and his anger and unbalanced nature came from the death of his son and a man named Max Wolfe, the new owner of the Palace Mill. Records in 1899 state New York City resident Max Wolfe secured a financial interest in Palace, and then later retained full possession of the mill. Wolfe was then listed as owner of the Palace Ribbon Mill in January of 1899. Records then show Maurice was listed as silk worker employed as a foreman. Max Wolfe was now principal owner of the mill, came frequently from New York City by cab. Maurice's son Charles was listed as the superintendent. It was said Charles had some financial interest in Palace, but it was noted that there was a severed connection before 1899. It looks as though there is bad blood after the merge between the Zindersteins and Wolfe. The same year, sensational news. One of Max Wolfe's routine visits from New York City to the mill from New York City. He arrives in a cab and he's greeted by Maurice confronting him at the office steps of the mill. Note, these office steps are the very same steps to the present-day entrance, which are a mere 15 feet from the door of my unit. According to the cab driver that witnessed the whole thing, there was an animated argument with arms flying. Apparently, Maurice said Wolfe owed his son Charlie money for acquiring the mills. Maurice then fired 3 shots at Max with a revolver, was arrested the same day. It was big news. Newspapers widely reported Maurice felt Wolfe froze them out and thought Max owed Charlie money. Also reported Maurice lived in a house owned by Wolfe, but apparently Wolfe asked him to make improvements, and he allegedly never reimbursed him for that work. Maurice was then indicted for aggravated assault and battery. He had the intent to commit murder. He pleaded guilty and was fined $200, was sentenced to imprisonment in the county prison for 3 years. Then he was sent to a state hospital for the insane at Norristown, Pennsylvania. Prosecution stated that he was quote-unquote insane and a danger to himself and others. Requires restraint. More records show Maurice's mention of fighting in the German War, and in my opinion, the man may have had PTSD, and these events triggered a mental breakdown. Subsequent articles note Charlie's employees had great affection for him. He was highly regarded by all in the mills, which were primarily very young women and men. Sadly, child labor was rampant in all the mills in the area at the time. The children were mostly sent to work by their poor parents. Thankfully, more and more protests finally ended this, but only after many years of these children being robbed of their lives. Nevertheless, it was said Charlie was well loved and gave them cigars and candy when he retired suddenly. I believe this explains the very sad, quiet, somber feeling of this place. 1902, Charles died of typhoid fever. 1902, he was the age of 36. Wolfe continued to operate as owner with the Palace name. Max survived the bullets. He was only 50 at the time of the shooting. Despite his military background, Maurice had a terrible shot. In 1907, Maurice and wife Anna Marie both died within moments of each other. Although not with the mill at this point, because surely you can't keep your job after you shoot your employer. The silk industry thrived through the 1940s, dropped off at some point. Interviews with locals say the property was vacant for a while, then used as an antique market. Suffered trouble related to squatters and drug use in the 1980s. In conclusion, not sure if the knocks for help were from Maurice, but when I uncovered the story, I felt a sense of peace knowing Maurice's story was told. He came here to have the American dream, only to be terrorized mentally by war, heartbroken by sickness and loss, then swindled and betrayed by power and money. His sadness and the sadness of the child labors loom. A benign yet hopeless feeling that roams the halls, sends knocks into the night. Mimic or something else? My children have been talking about seeing something in their room the last few weeks. This thing they both described it as tall, lanky, gray-skinned with big, black, beady eyes. They described it as being surprised-looking, but it's almost taking on features of people in the house. So it's hairless sometimes, but other times it has long, dark hair like myself. They said it's almost looking like one of the kids in the facial structure they're onto. They look a lot alike. The first time my oldest saw it, she actually saw an arm come out of their closet. It wiggled its long fingers, and after was peeking around the closet at her, and when he went to look at it, she was 16. She was like, I must just be tired. But my youngest, who she hasn't told anything to, is not scare her, saw the same thing looking over at the door at her. My mom was over and we got on the subject of ghosts. Enthusiasts we are. My oldest daughter brought up seeing something, and before she could even get it out of my younger child, was like, did it look like this? And proceeded to describe it in detail. My oldest son said yes. So I know they're definitely seeing the same thing, but I haven't the faintest idea of what it could be. Can't tell if it's something bad because it hasn't really done much besides show itself, and they do hear whispers a lot in there. So far, they say it hasn't been seen outside since their room. It's only in there, but I'm bound to determine to get out there and, well, I am bound and determined to get it out, but I have to know what I'm dealing with first. They wanted you to forget. So this was a really weird occurrence. I'm not sure how it'll sound when written out, so bear with me. I've had just a few paranormal experiences, but they've all been in dream form. A few years ago, I had a dream where I was being confronted by something. It was telling me to remember. I asked what I was supposed to remember, and when I was transported into a different dream. I was young and in my parents' bedroom in our old house. They were out shopping and I was alone. Yet I heard my mom's voice in the room with me. Can't remember what she said exactly, but deep down I could tell that it wasn't actually her. And as soon as I had that feeling, her voice lowered into an inhuman growl. The voice from the beginning of my dream came back and said, "They wanted you to forget." I woke up in a cold sweat after that. Then I remembered. It wasn't a dream. This was a memory that I did indeed forget. The weirdest thing is because I'm really big on the paranormal and unexplained. I remember each and every encounter that I've had. While I do remember the time I heard someone mimicking my mother, I'd forgotten it ever happened for like 5 years. So basically, something made me forget this experience, and something made me remember it. I don't really understand it either. The mimic in the house. So last year my uncles decided to retire, thus changing their city home from a house in a smaller place. I went to help them move, and the weirdest thing happened in the house. I would see my family, my aunt, uncle, cousin, and a helper. They would be in rooms that they weren't at, and they also saw me. These encounters were recurring. You could even chat a bit with whatever was mimicking us. And then you realize the other person wasn't in the house or was in another room. They were also busy packing and everything that we didn't even notice until we sat down for dinner. Somebody would say something like, "You offered to go grab me a beer and didn't come back." And the other person would deny if we're holding that conversation. We also felt observed while in the house. It was an awful sensation. So much that we went together to get laundry or take the trash out. Things we normally did alone. At the beginning I was scared, but My aunt and uncle sort of didn't really react to this. They just said that when they bought the house, which was 30 years prior, it happened too. It stopped after a few months. Forgot to mention, it was a month of us moving, and during that move, the toaster, the microwave, and the oven just started malfunctioning. The toaster even caught on fire. Something inside the microwave exploded. I have the theory that now they're selling the house, and with all the movement, whatever was there awoke and started making itself known. My brother-in-law, the ghost. When my sister was 18, she decided to be independent. Randomly left Texas. She's prone to this kind of decision. When she was 21, she moved back home. She was married with 2-year-old or something like that. Nothing weird so far. When she returned, I was just leaving for college to another city. Met her new family briefly. She, her husband, and her child stayed with my parents while they quote-unquote figured things out. A month went by and suddenly her husband, 20-plus years old, died from a heart attack. Seemed like he had some genetic undiagnosed heart disease, just dropped dead. My sister was obviously devastated, basically relayed the care of her child to my mom, and she just again left to another city. But she did visit frequently. One day while speaking to my mom, I heard my nephew say, "There's the man." I asked my mom about this, and she said that my nephew was always talking about this man in the house that nobody could see. Even when they left the house, the child would say goodbye to this man, as babies do with numerous bye-bye-bye. My mother just told me they sometimes saw a shadow. Nothing bad had happened, so they didn't pay it any mind. This went on for years. The child was always talking, interacting with this man who nobody saw. Meanwhile, my sister was really depressed and never talked about her husband. No one really did, and, well, we didn't know the guy. Everything was so quick that we didn't even interact with him. Didn't have any pictures of him or anything. Nothing aside from her had any attachment to him. Also, this was like 2006, so cell phones had cameras, but not a lot of memory. So really, we didn't have any pictures of him. I'm stressing this so you can see that my nephew had no way of knowing his dad. Sure that he saw him until he was maybe 2, but now he was 6 when suddenly his father's brother decided to send an email with a photo of my sister's late husband. The photo that was saved and forgotten in a computer. The family computer had the screensaver. It was a gallery of all the photos saved in the system. And that's where my nephew saw it, instantly shouted, "That's the man!" I remember it clearly, because by that time we all knew the man. Nobody saw him, but if something happened in the house or there was a weird shadow, we said, "Oh, is the man." And we all would just say bye to him when we left, and we would also say hello to him when we arrived. He was already part of the family. So we went to the computer, showed the kid all the pictures. That was the photo of his dad, and the kid just said, "That's the man who visits me at night." We were freaked out. He was elated. For a week he asked again and again to see the pictures, and my mom decided against my sister's wishes to tell him that that was his father. Since then he would talk about the man less and less, until we stopped talking about him completely. Now as a teenager, my nephew doesn't remember anything at all. And around the time my nephew found the photo, my sister remarried, took him with her. I think he was just looking after his child when, he had a stable life, he left. Who knows? Do we visit our loved ones before we die? This is about something I was once told by an elderly woman. She said that when somebody's about to die, their spirit visits their loved ones in some form or another. I think I've experienced something similar. So, here we go. I was 8. My brother was 10 at the time, and, we used to live in a government colony. For context, my father's a retired government officer. During those days, we lived in government bungalows. To give you an idea of the place, the houses were more like individual bungalows built over an area of maybe 3,500 square feet. Had plenty of space left for gardening and other activities. The fencing covered the whole area, had a 35-foot road separating our house from another similar house opposite the road. A single lane consisted of 6 similar houses facing each other in pairs, and adjacent houses shared a wide gallery that sort of led to 2 separate gates for both bungalows. Since it was the middle of winter, a season that comes with many weddings and celebrations, we were planning to attend a similar event at one of our acquaintances' homes that day. Due to the cold, everybody would go inside their house by 7. The roads would be almost deserted. The house opposite ours had been empty for a long time. There's a small story behind this, which I heard from my mom's gossip group, and it goes like this. The resident, a government officer, had an elderly woman, mother-in-law to his wife, a wife and 3 boys. One day the mother-in-law died in a kerosene stove explosion. This happened before I was born. The lady said it was very suspicious because every resident was an officer, and hence pretty well off. No one used a kerosene stove, which was mostly used by the poor. Being killed by a stove explosion was very suspicious, especially since she sent her kids to her relatives that day, which added to the suspicion. Consequently, there was a rumor that the wife had something to do with it. A few years later, the husband had some kind of accident that left him unable to walk. After a few more years, their second son, who was in his early 20s, died in a road accident. The wife told her friends, which is her and my mom was part of the same gossip group, that every time she saw her mother-in-law in her dreams, something bad happened the very next day, which was brushed off as superstition. After a few years, she had another dream of her mother-in-law, shared it with her friends, expressing her anxiety that something bad would happen again. Everybody said that she was just getting paranoid over nothing, but the next day, her husband, the resident, died, and consequently everybody suggested they leave the residence as soon as possible, which they did. After they left, many families moved into that house, but everybody left within a week or 2 to maybe a month. They all reported feeling uneasy, or having bad dreams, or sensing that they were being watched. Some ran away after hearing the story, while others complained that something was not right. This was pretty wild in those days, and we kids would be terrified when our elders threatened to leave us if we didn't finish our food. So as far as I can remember, the house remained empty for many years. We kids used to call it the haunted house. So, returning to my story. It was 7 p.m. Everyone was inside their houses due to the cold. There was absolutely no one on the road. Since my brother and I were ready for the event, we went outside to the garden. My brother was playing with the football when he kicked it out of the fence and ran outside to catch it before it went too close to the haunted house. Seeing my brother running outside, I ran ahead of him to catch the ball first. The moment I caught the football, I saw my brother looking up at the roof of the haunted house. My eyes followed the direction he was looking. We both saw an enormous ball that seemed to be made of burning twigs, like the ones we see underneath when we try to turn the grass pile on fire. The fireball extinguished as it moved behind the haunted house. This all happened in about a second. We both looked at each other in horror, left the ball there and sprinted toward our house, screaming. We never talked about it until recently. That's when he claimed that we might have imagined it. The next morning I was playing on the road with my neighbor. That's when suddenly my neighbor's mom called my mom. It was because somebody had called her on their landline, as our landline wasn't working. The moment I heard the word call, the very first thought that came to me was that Nanu, my grandfather on my maternal side, had died. When I went home after playing, I found out that Nanu had indeed died. I never told this to anyone, but I heard from my mamu, my uncles on my maternal side, that prior to Nanu's death, he'd been acting as if he already knew he was going to die in the near future. He made all the necessary provisions, took care of many legal matters, and rushed to harvest the farms, which seems strange to everybody, that he was in such a hurry. But after hearing from that old lady, I sometimes wonder if the ball of fire that my brother and I saw was actually my Nanu visiting us before his death. Or maybe it was just a shared imagination and a silly thing to talk about, as at least my brother claims. The neighbor's daughter never existed. My family used to celebrate bonfire night when I lived in the UK. If you don't know what that is, well, you probably should have been listening in history class. Anyway, our tradition was to buy paper lanterns, write notes to everybody that we lost, put them inside, light them up, and watch them burn out in the sky. Pretty beautiful now that I think about it. I was at my grandma's when this happened. We were all in the back garden. After letting go, we cheered and cried, but we were happy. At one point, the memories are kind of hazy, but the things that stood out are so vivid in my head. I was on my mom's shoulders, and everybody was talking about my great aunt who had passed several years before. She was the rock to the family, and my first ever memory of my entire life is her. Now to the weird stuff. The next door neighbor's house was dark. Nobody was inside, and for context, there was a small alleyway in between the two houses. That led to a door to the main road. We couldn't really see much. It was nighttime. But I looked at the neighbor's house and around until I saw this little girl. Had very long white hair and dressed in all white. It really felt like she was glowing in the dark. She was walking down the alleyway. I freaked out instantly and started crying and screaming at my mom that there was a girl walking down the alleyway. There was no one. Mom said that I was just too tired and needed sleep. Weird from her since she's a big ghost believer, and so I thought she'd believe me. Now, to the extra weird part. I actually got the chance to speak to the neighbors one time after. I don't know how long after, I was pretty young, but I used to be kind of a weird kid that was pretty sociable to anybody, and thank you ADHD. The man was a really nice guy with a really cute dog, and this dog just jumped over the fence to see me in my grandma's garden while I was playing. This led to a conversation with the neighbor. I asked outright if they had any kid. He told me no, and that they were waiting for the dog to pass to try to have one. They were a young couple. I was shook. I told him that I saw that night, and he took a while to respond. When he did, he told me to sit down next to him. He looked me in the eyes and said, "I believe you. I've already seen her before. Don't worry, you're not crazy." Something like that. But out of nowhere, he drops a bombshell on me. He's saying that, in any case, our brains are in cylinders on a satellite in space being controlled by something, and whatever we perceive as life is just a simulation. Not his exact words, but something close. That's why I know you're not lying, and that's why ghosts exist. He looks very visibly freaked out and told me I should leave. I never ever saw them again. Absolutely mental. Sort of. Creature in the Lakes of Finland. I was spending time in a summer house in the woods with my mother. The area is very much in the woods, but there's one digging area for gravel, some kilometers away, and a couple more summer houses. Can't really see them. So it's not like we're completely isolated. So we're leaving after being there a couple of days. I was looking at the lake in front of the summer house. I saw a swan, probably like 70 or 80, maybe meters or so away from the summer house and the lake. Pretty close to the sleet, if that's the right word. Sleet? I believe sleet is wet snow. I looked at the swan, and it started to form in like a tall white thing, like white tall creature. Stayed completely still on top of the water. Now, I'm a logic person, so I started to doubt my eyesight and the lighting. I kept watching it and turned back into a swan, like it shrank, transformed again, and I called my mom to look at it. Well, it was still looking like a swan, she said. It's just a swan. But when it turned into a tall white thing, my mom was quiet. I asked, how can that be explained? She said she doesn't know. After that, it did it a couple times, and then it stayed as a swan. It didn't turn into anything again. We left the summer house, and we didn't talk about it much. Well, if anything, it's a great fireplace story, but the thing that bothers me is that I actually saw it. I don't know how to explain it. I want to explain it because the fact that there'd be a creature like that would crush my viewing on life completely. That's paranormal. If anybody wants to try to explain this to me, if they can, or if it can be lighting or something else. It was just too tall to be an illusion. If it wasn't, I wouldn't be typing this. I still go to the summer house a lot. I spend a lot of time there. I always look around in the woods, stare at that lake. Kinda want to see it again. Suppose if it was actually real and not me and my mom tripping at the same time for some reason, it wouldn't be a ghost, but some ancient creature that could have been one of the mythical creatures Finnish people feared, or even the ones that they worshipped in ancient times. I don't really know. I do really want to see it again. I'm sort of in a crisis about seeing it. Can't believe it's real. I never believe people when they tell stories like that, but I just saw it. Like, I saw it with my own eyes. No bullshit. Not a story, not a crappy video like I saw it myself. There's no better proof than that. I'm going to the summer house tomorrow to celebrate my friend's birthday. I don't think the creature will ever show up again because I think that's the closest it's been to people. I think it tries to avoid people and accidentally it just went that close, or I don't know. Somehow I tell myself it's some part of nature, like a rare animal or something. Also, about the transforming, like how it looked like. So at some point the neck of the swan kind of disappeared, and the butt of the swan as well. So it kind of felt like it was dizzy. Not literally, but like, you know, when you see those videos of, like, deserts and the view is wavy because of the hotness. I guess there was something sort of like that I was looking at. But only the swan, not anything else. Then the neck appeared thicker and higher, and the standing white entity was there literally just chilling, sitting on top of the water. This is just how I remembered it, like the transformation was smooth. You didn't even realize it till it was already standing. So I thought this is something that's also interesting, like how does it do that? Also, that's something I'd want to know in a story like this. Bon voyage.